The Washington Commanders are roughly 5 interceptions away from challenging the likes of the San Francisco 49ers for the right to be the best defense in the National Football League. I'll tell you how I got to that number coming up, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into this Wednesday episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, do me a favor, please click the like button. It will tell YouTube that Commanders fans like this video and send it to other fans just like yourself. And you can continue this conversation with me if you like over on joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, where you can go one-on-one with me, David Harrison, your host for this show, on Twitter at dharrison82, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, I appreciate your support for the show. On today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going to discuss semifinalists announced for the 2024 class to enter the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we'll discuss whether or not safety Kamren Curl is really all that special. But first, we're going to start off today's episode with a leftover mailbag question from yesterday that I wanted to save and answer today because this is a multi-segment answer that I have come up with, and hopefully you can all follow along with my reasoning here. Now, Jacob asked ahead of the mailbag episode, can the Commanders defense take the next step to be a top defense like the 49ers? Well, if you ask CBS Sports, the Commanders wouldn't actually take the next step. They would actually take the next 2 steps to be with the San Francisco 49ers. So when you look at the Commanders defense versus the San Francisco 49ers defense, CBS Sports actually ranks the Washington Commanders 2 tiers below the tier that the 49ers are in. Now, CBS Sports kind of did this a little bit interestingly. They didn't really rank 1 to 32. What they did is they put teams in categories of how likely they are to be a top 10 defense in 2023. The Washington Commanders came in the 3rd tier of teams, which is the possibly tier. That's how they labeled it. So basically, these 10 teams in this tier could possibly be top 10 defenses, according to CBS Sports in 2023. Those 10 teams are, of course, the Washington Commanders, but also the Carolina Panthers, Cleveland Browns, Green Bay Packers, Jacksonville Jaguars, Kansas City Chiefs, Los Angeles Chargers, Miami Dolphins, New Orleans Saints, and Seattle Seahawks. Now, among the 10 possiblies on that list, the Washington Commanders are first, or were rather in 2022. They were first in yards allowed per game, 3rd in rushing yards per game, 2nd in passing yards per game, 8th in interception rate, 3rd in sacks per pass attempt, 1st in first downs per game, 1st in third down percentage, 6th in fourth down percentage, 2nd in red zone percentage, 1st in goal to go percentages, and 1st in points per game allowed. That gives them an average positioning within this top 10 of 2.64. So on average, the Washington Commanders, out of the top 10 possibilities that CBS Sports identifies, they're ranked 2.64, so 2.5 or so in that group. Now, I ran through the rest of the numbers for the rest of these teams. It took me a very long time, so I really hope you appreciate the numbers. I'm going to give you all those statistical details, but I will tell you this. The Washington Commanders came out on top. 2.64 was the highest average or lowest average, right? This is kind of like golf scores. So 2.64 was the lowest average ranking, the best average ranking. Let's just put it that way. Second place was the Saints, who came in 3.73. So a full ranking points lower than the Washington Commanders. And then you have teams like the Los Angeles Chargers at 4.64, the Packers at 4.73, the Browns come in next, followed by the Chiefs, followed by the Seahawks and the Dolphins, Panthers, and Jaguars. The Panthers and Jaguars actually tied for 9th here, but I gave the Jaguars the 10th spot because they had more of those categories that we just talked about, where they ranked 10th out of this group again of 10 teams. So basically what this is illustrating is that the Washington Commanders are the best defense coming out of last season for this season's possibly group. Now, that doesn't necessarily make them the best defense in this group, right? But that's not really the question we're here to answer. What we're here to answer is, how close are the Washington Commanders to the San Francisco 49ers, and can they reach that level? Well, ahead of the possibly groups, according to CBS Sports, you have the somewhat likely group, and you have the likely groups. Those teams consist of the Baltimore Ravens, Bengals, Broncos, Jets, Eagles, and Steelers defenses in the somewhat likely to be top 10 defenses this year category. The Bills, Cowboys, Patriots, and Niners, who we're talking about, are in the most likely. So essentially, the Bills, Cowboys, Patriots, and Niners are your top 5 defenses, or rather top 4 defenses in the NFL, according to CBS Sports, but they're not putting a numerical value on any of them. Then the next 6 are the Ravens, Bengals, Broncos, Jets, Eagles, and Steelers. Again, they're not putting a numerical value on it. And then you have the 10 teams that are possibles. And for me, since I've identified the Commanders as the best defense coming out of 2022, now there are some other ways you look at that, additions, subtractions, all that stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and say that the Washington Commanders haven't lost enough from last year's defense and have gained enough in this year's defense to still be ranked up there. So I'm going to say the Washington Commanders defense, according to the CBS Sports tier ranking, are the 11th best defense entering the 2023 season. So if you take those teams and you look at Washington's possibly group, you could, again, argue that Washington is the 11th best defense. But how does the 49ers defense rank in that group of 10 possiblies, right? So let's take them down a notch, because if they're that much better, they should dominate these rankings, right? Well, if you look at the Niners and you add them in here, the Niners defense from last year would be first in yards per game, first in rushing yards per game, 8th in passing yards per game, 2nd in interception rate, 6th in sacks per pass attempt, 2nd in first downs allowed per game, 4th in third down percentage, 3rd in fourth down percentage, 7th in red zone percentage, 5th in goal to go percentage, and 1st in points per game allowed. And that would give the 49ers an average ranking of 3.64. Now, you might remember the Commanders came in at 2 point something, right? But if we're going to be fair about this, where the 49ers rank higher than the Commanders, you have to push the Commanders down. So when you adjust that ranking to the 11th group or 11-team group, now that the Niners are in there, the Washington Commanders adjusted average position, 3.09. So holistically, they actually still rank better performance-wise, production-wise, according to last year's numbers, than the San Francisco 49ers do. Now, the 49ers did go out and add some new talent. Javon Hargrave, for example, who comes from the Philadelphia Eagles to the San Francisco 49ers. But again, I think when you look at what the Washington Commanders have added compared to what they lost from last year's unit, I don't think the discrepancy is that big. So in this light, it actually appears that from a holistic point of view, again, the Commanders defense might already be better than San Francisco's. But San Francisco does have a leg up in some areas, because none of these team rankings from last year, of course, take into account those changes on the team. But they also don't weigh the most significant defensive categories. And I think we all know that not every defensive category should be weighed the exact same. So we're going to take a look at some of those categories that should be weighed a little bit heavier and see where the Niners differ from the Washington Commanders. That is going to come up here in just a moment. But before we do that, I do need to tell you that our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And if you've got the number one pick in your fantasy league draft, then you might be able to secure your New Year's Eve success story in July or August, depending on when your draft is, by taking San Francisco 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey. Vinny says about McCaffrey, when making the first overall pick in fantasy football drafts in 2023, 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey is a guaranteed fit. A healthy McCaffrey is guaranteed to see well more than 300 touches again in his first full season in San Francisco, and is the centerpiece of the 49ers offensive engine. McCaffrey checks all the boxes, including his talent and usage, high floor and ceiling. Run with CMC as the guaranteed fit at number one for a smooth ride to another year of big numbers. And even though it might pain you to cheer on Christian McCaffrey on New Year's Eve at FedEx Field, if he helps you win your fantasy championship and Washington wins, because remember, Christian McCaffrey could have a good day, but the Washington Commanders can still get that win, then you can literally get your cake and eat it too. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, tail lights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check, get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Thanks again, Commanders fans, for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen today and every day. Continuing now our conversation, our look at the Washington Commanders defense through the lens of competing with the San Francisco 49ers defense. We need to weigh some of the rankings that we just averaged and discussed. And we'll start with the most important stat for any defense: points scored. I don't care what your third down percentage is. I don't care what your fourth down percentage is. I don't care how many passing yards you give up a game. If you're not giving up points at the end of the day, you're going to put your team in a position to win. In 2022, the 49ers allowed an average of 16.3 points per game, which is insanely low, while the Washington Commanders allowed 20.2 points a game, which is still very low. If you flip those values, though, if you give the San Francisco 49ers defense 20.2 points a game and you give the Washington Commanders defense 16.3 points per game, Washington is now 12-5 and the 49ers are 13-5. So what this shows you is really what most Commanders fans, and not all Commanders fans, already knew, that the problem isn't really the defense, it's the offense. Of course, if the defense can get even better, then it can absorb a subpar offense, as illustrated by the Commanders picking up 4 more wins in that point swap with no improvements to the offensive output whatsoever. Like, if the Washington Commanders offense does exactly what they did last year, but the Washington Commanders defense only gives up 16.5 points, the Washington Commanders are a 12-win team, and they're in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Now, I say only, and I say if they just do this, and it's not that simple, of course. So how does Washington do this? Well, the most important stat is really a conglomerate of other areas that San Francisco is besting Washington in, starting with takeaways. That's how you keep the points down, right? You take your opponent off the field, they can't score points. Well, the 49ers have the 3rd highest interception rate in the NFL in 2022, and the Commanders had the 7th worst. The result of that was the San Francisco 49ers defense coming away with 20 interceptions, while Washington's had just 9. And San Francisco even outpaced Washington in fumble recoveries by 1. So both categories, 21 takeaways. So when you look at both of those stats combined, you're really talking about a 12 takeaway difference between the Washington Commanders and the San Francisco 49ers. You're talking what, like 0.75 takeaways per game that the Niners got over the Washington Commanders. So if Washington were to pick up even half of those takeaways, let's not even talk about 12 takeaways improvement. So let's make it 14 interceptions instead of 9. Let's give 5 more interceptions to the Washington Commanders. You can even make it 6 and call it 15 interceptions instead of 9. But if it's 14 interceptions, the Commanders defense is now ranked 12th in the NFL instead of 26th. That's how big that jump is if the Washington Commanders can pull that off. And we go back to that statistical averaging exercise that we just talked about. How much better is the Washington Commanders number if they're now not 26th in the league in interceptions, but now they're 12th in the league in interceptions? But the trick is getting more turnovers without taking so many unnecessary risks that you give up the big plays, right? Because the Seattle Seahawks defense ranked 12th last year in interception ratio, but they also ranked 27th in third down defense and 24th in the red zone, 2 areas that the Commanders ranked top 10. So you don't want to give up all the third down stops. You don't want to give up the red zone stops just for the sake of getting some interceptions. If you get 5 more interceptions, but you give up 5 more touchdowns because your red zone percentage goes down, are you really coming out on the positive? Well, now you're really putting it in the hands of your offense, because your offense has to get touchdowns on those takeaways, or else you're actually giving up more points and you're actually hurting your team as an end result, right? So here's my recommendation to make this happen, right? I'm going to say it real easy on the Locked On Commanders podcast. And Jack Del Rio, you're just going to go out there, you're just going to make this happen, because that's how this is going to work. No. But my recommendation to make this happen: get more aggressive from your own 40-yard line or better, right? So if you're at your own 40 to the 50 into the opponent's side of the field, get more aggressive, more blitz, play more, I don't say more man, they're really good in zone, but be more aggressive in that zone coverage. Put some top coverage out there, right? Put Percy Butler out there, put Derek Forrest out there, give your guys some top coverage so they can be aggressive underneath. Use the ball skills and the versatility of guys like Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin that you drafted for that exact reason that we've already seen glimpses of at OTAs and during minicamp. But get smarter and more fundamental when inside your own 40 to leverage that top 10 third down defense, red zone defense, and goal-to-go defense that we saw last year. Yes, your third down percentages may go down a little bit. You may give up more third down conversions. You may give up a few more first downs per game. So maybe you're not going to be first in the league. But if you drop to, say, fifth, if you drop to fifth place in third down percentage, if you drop to fifth place in first downs given up, but you jump to 12th in interceptions, I think that is a deal that has the Washington Commanders defense and the team as a whole coming out better. But then, like I said, you get inside your own 40, go back to what worked last year. Go back to that smart, safe, secure football and defense. Force teams to take field goals. Force teams to come off the field without a touchdown. Use that to your advantage. And then look at Eric Bieniemy. Look at Sam Howell and say, look, we kept him to 3. You need to go get us 4 extra points. To me, that is how you get Washington's defense closer to the top 10 and nearing the top 5 or the top 4 where CBS has the San Francisco 49ers. Can they do it? Sure. 5 interceptions? Yeah, I think you can make that happen. Is it going to happen? That's really the biggest question, and that's something, unfortunately, I can't tell you at this juncture in the offseason. I can't even tell you if I'm confident they will do it at this juncture in the offseason, but I can tell you they've got the horses, right? You've got the horses, but just like we've talked about this team for many years now, it's not just about having the talent. You got to have the execution. So we'll see if the execution is there. I actually got another question about the defense that I'm going to answer here, and it came from Jay on YouTube, who asked me to do a video on how Kamren Curl's numbers say he's just another guy and not a special safety in the National Football League, not someone the Washington Commanders necessarily need to bring back. So I looked at it, and here's what I found. Since 2020, when Kamren Curl entered the league, he's played 2,368 snaps at safety, and among safeties with at least 2,000 snaps in that same stretch, of which there are 40, he ranks tied for 28th in interceptions, 11th in tackles, 11th in solo tackles, tied for 37th in passes broken up, 21st in passing yards allowed, tied for 18th in touchdown catches allowed, tied for 22nd in QBR allowed, 32nd in snap percentage, and his stat average ranking is 26. So that probably supports a little bit of what Jay is saying. Now, the 26th highest paid safety in the NFL right now is Las Vegas Raiders safety Marcus Epps, who's making $6 million a year on average value. Now, Curl's leadership and presence is important, though, right? It's not all about the stat box. His presence on the field, his presence on the team, his leadership in the locker room is valuable. And when you factor in his leadership, you factor in inflation, because every year, every new deal gets inflated. You're probably talking about $8 million a year for Kamren Curl, which is much more than the $2.4 million he's made over the course of the first 3 seasons in the league. And it would make him the 19th highest paid safety in the National Football League if it were compared to this year's current contract numbers. Now, among strong safeties, that would actually make him the 3rd highest paid strong safety in the league, according to SpotTrack, behind Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs in annual average value. Again, and would put him just above Von Bell, who is currently making $7.5 million on average annual value on his current deal. Now, statistically, since 2020, Von Bell has played 3 in more games. He's started more games, and he has 18 more combined tackles, 2 more interceptions, and 12 more PBUs. Curl, meanwhile, has 2.5 more sacks, the same amount of solo tackles and tackles for loss, and he's got 1 more pick 6 than Von Bell has. So a pretty even duo. So I think that valuation, given the inflation and the fact that Curl is 5 years younger than Von Bell, I do think that seems to fit. So I don't know if 3rd highest paid strong safety makes him special or not, but that's what the numbers say. So I'll leave Jay, you, and the rest of the Commanders fans to take those numbers and do with them as you will. What is the Hall of Fame, though, going to say when considering some semifinalists from Washington's past? That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. On Wednesday, the Pro Football Hall of Fame announced 60 semifinalists for the 2024 senior and coach contributor categories for consideration to enter the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Of course, among those 60 are some familiar faces and names from Washington's history, including offensive tackle and one of the Hogs, Joe Jacoby, who spent 13 years with Washington, winning 3 Super Bowls, making 4 consecutive Pro Bowls from 1983 to 1986. How is this man not in the Hall of Fame already? Also, running back Larry Brown, who made it to 4 Pro Bowls, had 2 All-Pro seasons, and was the league's MVP in 1972, helping Washington make it to a Super Bowl. Wide receiver Henry Ellard, who played for Washington from 1994 to 1998. Linebackers Carl Banks and Mike Bond, who each spent 1 year with Washington during their careers. Receiver and returner Billy White Shoes Johnson, who should be in the Hall of Fame for his nickname alone. Billy White Shoes Johnson played for Washington in 1988. Frank Bucko Kilroy, who was in the player personnel and scouting business for Washington at one point, along with a few other teams, and 3 former Washington coaches, Marty Schottenheimer, who I just spoke about with Adam Epstein, actually, on his radio show this week, Mike Shanahan, and Clark Shaughnessy. Clark Shaughnessy was an assistant coach, I believe, with Washington during his time. Mike Shanahan, if you are an RG3 fan, you probably are not a Mike Shanahan fan. But those are the 3 coaches from Washington's history up for enshrinement in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2024. Next up, 12 of those senior players. So the players are all considered senior players. 12 of those, 12 of senior players. Some of those Washington players could be among them, and 12 coach/contributors, which the scout, player personnel, and the coaches are part of that. 12 of them will become finalists on July 27th. And of course, we will keep you updated with that as it comes out as well. And that is going to do it for today's episode. Coming up tomorrow, we got more Washington Commanders talk as we get near the end of the week. Sorry about the flipped timeline. We're kind of going with the early afternoon, early evening publishing schedule just because of the trip I had to take this weekend. It's got me kind of pushed backwards a little bit, but I appreciate you bearing with me. In the meantime, before the next episode, if you got questions or comments, throw them in the YouTube comments, throw them on Twitter, email me at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com, or hit me up via text at Subtext. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, and every dayers. I greatly appreciate you for continuing to come through like you do. Remember, you can continue this conversation with me just by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day, part of your routine. Before you leave, hit that like button if you haven't already. If you have anything else Commanders related you want to discuss, find me on Twitter at dharrison82. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.